My name is Ethan, I'm 42 years old, and 6 months ago my entire life was reduced to a 6-inch glass screen. There's a sound I'll never forget, the soft, metallic click of a phone hitting the nightstand while my wife slept. In that second, the man who built a home, a future, and a family died, and the man I am today was born. Watching the woman you love breathe peacefully while her phone vibrates with a message that should not exist is a very specific kind of torture. What I saw on that device wasn't just a conversation. It was the exact map of how she had been erasing me from my own existence for the past 2 years. It hit hard, cold, straight to the gut. I didn't scream. I didn't wake her up. I simply felt the blood freeze in my veins as I read every word, every detail of her contempt for me. That was the moment I understood that loyalty is a currency no longer accepted in the market of mediocre people. She thought I was the predictable husband, the provider, the one who never suspects anything because he's too busy working to give her the life she loves to show off. How wrong she was. Taking that phone was the first step of a plan with no turning back. If you like stories where betrayal has consequences and justice arrives without warning, leave your like and subscribe. Here, we share real stories of revenge and lessons that are never forgotten. For 15 years, I believed I had won the game of life. My relationship with Emily was, in anyone's eyes, the gold standard. I consider myself a man of logic, numbers, and solid structures. As an engineer, I understand that for a building to stand, its foundations must be non-negotiable. I thought our marriage was that building. We had the house we always wanted, the respect of our neighbors, and a routine that, far from boring me, gave me deep peace. I woke up at 5 in the morning, worked 12 hours, and came home with the satisfaction of knowing my family lacked nothing. Emily was always there, with a soft smile, asking about my day while serving dinner. We were a team, or at least that's what my stupid arrogance made me believe. At 42, you think you already know your partner's gestures as if they were your own. I knew the tone of her laugh, the way she moved her hair when she was nervous, and the exact silence that preceded a problem. However, something began to change almost imperceptibly. It was like a microscopic crack in a load-bearing wall. At first it was overtime at her administrative job. Then came a sudden interest in the gym and in renewing a wardrobe she once considered perfectly fine. In my infinite confidence, I celebrated it. I thought she was seeking her own fulfillment, and as a man who loved her, I gave her all the space in the world. I was never the jealous or possessive type who checks purses or questions schedules. My mistake was projecting my own integrity onto someone who no longer had it. She became more protective of her personal space. The phone she used to leave anywhere became an extension of her hand. She took it to the bathroom, placed it face down on the table, and changed the password we had shared for a decade for work security reasons. I felt slightly displaced, but my logical mind searched for excuses. Stress, a need for privacy, a midlife crisis. Anything but accepting the truth right in front of me. At dinner, silence was no longer comfortable. It was heavy with something I couldn't decipher. She looked at me, but she no longer saw me. She was physically present, but her mind was elsewhere, living in a world where I was no longer the protagonist, just a necessary inconvenience to keep up appearances. Intimacy became a formality, a mechanical gesture stripped of the connection that had held us together for so long. Whenever I tried to get close, there was always an excuse. A headache, gym fatigue, an unresolved concern. I accepted it with the patience of a saint or an idiot. I convinced myself these were just phases, that all marriages go through long winters. But this winter felt different. It was a cold that came from inside her. I began to notice she dressed up more for a simple office meeting than for our anniversary dates. The perfume I had given her years ago was replaced by something stronger, more provocative, and deep inside my instincts, an alarm began to ring. It was visceral, a knot in my throat that water couldn't wash away. My friends told me I was lucky, that Emily looked better than ever, that the years weren't touching her. So I smiled and thanked them, but inside I felt like I was losing control of my own narrative. My life, which had always been a chessboard where I moved the pieces with precision, was turning into a game of chance where I didn't know the rules. I couldn't understand how someone who had shared my bed for so long could become a stranger so quickly. Suspicion didn't arrive all at once. It was a slow leak that eventually flooded everything. I found myself analyzing her words, searching for inconsistencies in her stories about why she came home late or who she had lunch with. I felt pathetic doing that, but the mind of an intelligent man cannot ignore anomalies for long. I even thought the problem was me, that maybe I had become too monotonous, too focused on work. I tried to compensate. I bought flowers, planned weekend getaways she rejected with a kindness that hurt more than an insult. "It's not a good time, Ethan," she would say. "I have too much work piled up." And I would back off, apologizing for wanting to be a present husband. I felt like a beggar, asking for crumbs of affection in my own palace. That's the point where most men break or go insane. I chose to observe. I became a spectator in my own home. I stopped asking, stopped insisting, and started collecting data in silence. I knew the truth was there, hidden behind that unlocked pattern she traced so effortlessly every time she thought I wasn't watching. I was waiting for the right moment, the mistake every traitor makes sooner or later out of overconfidence. And that moment came on a rainy night, when sleep overtook her before she could hide her tracks. Thursday night was the beginning of the end. Emily fell asleep on the right side of the bed, her body slightly turned toward the wall. She had been texting until the very last second, before exhaustion finally took over. The phone slipped from her hand and landed there on the sheets, briefly lighting up the ceiling with a notification before going dark. I stayed completely still, listening to her heavy breathing. My heart was pounding against my ribs with a force that scared me. I reached out. My fingers brushed the cold metal of the device. In that instant, part of me wanted to leave it there, close my eyes, and keep living inside the comfortable lie. But dignity is a weight that doesn't let you sleep. I picked it up. She always used a complex unlock pattern, but that afternoon, while she was having coffee, I had watched her through the reflection of a painting on the wall. I memorized the movement of her finger, an inverted Z that ended in a circle. I traced it on the screen with a trembling hand. Click. The device unlocked. The first thing that appeared was a messaging app I didn't even know she used. There were no profile photos, just a name, MR. I opened it. What I read over the next 20 minutes erased the last 15 years of my life. They weren't just messages. There were videos, voice notes, photos she never dared to take with me. Betrayal has a bitter smell, and that night it filled the entire room. I read how they mocked me. "The engineer is in a meeting," she wrote, followed by a laughing emoji. "We have the house to ourselves until 10. He, a guy who turned out to be a former instructor from her gym, answered with a vulgarity she eagerly encouraged. She called me boring, predictable, a man who no longer made her feel like a woman. Every word was a burning nail driven straight into my chest. A deep nausea hit me. It wasn't just that she was sleeping with another man. It was the absolute contempt with which she spoke about me in those conversations. She described me as a walking ATM, someone she kept satisfied with the bare minimum so she could continue enjoying the security I provided. I discovered that the business trip she took last month was actually a weekend with him at a resort I ended up paying for myself through our joint account. My money, my effort, my time, everything used to finance my own humiliation. I got out of bed without making a sound. I went to the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face. I looked at myself in the mirror and didn't recognize the man staring back. My eyes were bloodshot, my jaw clenched so tight my teeth hurt. The rage wanted to explode. It wanted to storm into the bedroom, wake her up screaming, throw her things out the window, and kick her out of my house right then and there. But then my cold, rational mind took control. If I confronted her now, she would cry, beg for forgiveness, invent excuses, and try to manipulate me. Or worse, she'd call a lawyer and in the chaos of a divorce walk away with half of everything I built with sweat and discipline. No, she didn't deserve an easy exit. She deserved to feel the emptiness she was leaving behind. I went back to the bedroom. She was still sleeping, unaware that her world had just caught fire. With a calm that surprised even me, I started forwarding every screenshot, every video, every bank record to a secret email account I created on the spot. I deleted the sent messages to leave no trace. and placed the phone exactly where it had been. I lay down beside her, but I didn't close my eyes. I spent the rest of the night staring at the ceiling, replaying the image of my wife moaning in a video that wasn't meant for me. The next morning, she woke up and kissed me on the cheek. "Good morning, my love," she said, in that sweet voice that now made my skin crawl. A wave of disgust ran down my spine. "Good morning," I replied, keeping the neutral tone I had perfected over years at negotiation tables. She looked me in the eyes, and for a second I thought she suspected something. But her narcissism was stronger than her intuition. She got up, grabbed her phone, and locked herself in the bathroom, probably to say good morning to him. That was the day I stopped being her husband and became her silent executioner. I left the house without breakfast. I didn't go to the office. I drove straight to the office of a man I knew through business, a lawyer with a reputation for leaving nothing but crumbs on the table during a legal battle. I sat across from him, handed him a USB drive, and said, "I want her to end up with nothing. I don't care how long it takes. I don't care about the cost. I want her to understand what being truly free really means." The lawyer glanced through a few photos, closed the laptop, and looked at me with an icy smile. "Ethan," he said, "this won't be a divorce. It's going to be an autopsy." The lawyer, a man named Martin with eyes that had seen the worst of human nature, spread the documents across his oak desk. There were no words of comfort, and I appreciated that. Men like me don't look for pats on the back. We look for effectiveness. He explained that infidelity, as painful as it is, isn't always enough to dismantle someone legally, unless it's handled with surgical precision. We needed to prove the use of marital assets to finance her double life, and more importantly, we needed her to remain confident. "If she suspects you know anything, she'll move the money. You have to be the best actor of your life, Ethan," he told me. Over the next 3 months, I lived a split existence. By day, I was the dutiful husband who kept paying the bills and saying goodnight with a cold but functional kiss. In the shadows, I was a military strategist. I hired a private investigator, not to find out if she was cheating, I already knew that, but to document every expense, every gift she bought for her lover with our credit card, and every hour she neglected her legal responsibilities. My goal wasn't just divorce. It was the financial and social annihilation of her betrayal. I discovered that Emily wasn't just sleeping with that man. They were planning their future. She had been giving him cash so he could open a small personal training business. My money, the money I had been saving for our retirement, was being used to give wings to that parasite. That was the part that was hardest to process without exploding. I would sit across from her at dinner, watch her chew, listen to her talk about how exhausted she was from work, while inside I imagined the moment I would pull the ground out from under her feet. My main ally, besides Martin, was Emily's own arrogance. She thought I was a man worn down by routine, someone who wouldn't notice if a mountain collapsed beside him. I began moving my assets strategically. I opened accounts in jurisdictions she had no access to, shielded behind supposed failed investments from my company that the lawyer helped me disguise legally. I reduced our joint estate gradually, making sure that what remained was only what the law forced me to divide, nothing more. Every move was a piece of a puzzle she wouldn't see until it was complete. A key legal detail was the infidelity clause that, fortunately, we had signed in a post-nuptial agreement years earlier when we bought our second property. Back then, she agreed to sign it as a gesture of eternal love, laughing and saying we'd never need it. Martin found the document in the files. It was pure gold. Under that clause, the use of shared assets for extramarital activities invalidated a large portion of her rights to the main properties. Patience became my strongest weapon. There were days when I wanted to vomit, watching her text under the table while I told her about my day. But I held my ground. I became an expert in micro-gestures. I learned to recognize when she had just been with him by the way she avoided my gaze, or by the overly sharp tone she used to compensate for her guilt. I watched her lie again and again, and each lie was another brick in the cell I was building for her. I prepared myself emotionally as well. I began seeing a mentor, an older man who had gone through something similar and taught me to separate love from self-respect. The man who enters revenge with anger loses. The one who enters with justice prevails, he used to say. My reconstruction began from the inside out. I regained my physical condition, started studying again, and above all accepted that the woman I had married no longer existed. The one living in my house was a spectre, a parasite about to be expelled. The plan was ready. I had the recordings, the hotel receipts, the bank statements showing the flow of money to her lover, and most importantly, I had the element of surprise. I coordinated with Martin so that the lawsuit would be served at the moment of maximum exposure for her. I didn't want a private settlement in a grey office. I wanted the weight of her betrayal to crush her in front of the very world she worked so hard to impress. The board was set, the pieces were in place, and I was only waiting for the final move. The moment of truth didn't arrive with shouting or chaos, but in absolute icy silence. It was Emily's 40th birthday. She had planned an elegant dinner, one of those gatherings she loved where she could display our supposedly perfect life to her friends, her parents, and a few of my business partners. She looked radiant, wearing a dress I had bought for her myself just weeks earlier, never knowing it would become the uniform of her downfall. I stayed calm, sipping a glass of wine, watching her play the devoted wife. Every laugh of hers sounded sharp to me, like rusted metal scraping against glass. When it was time for the toast, I stood up. Everyone fell silent, waiting for the usual words of love and gratitude. I took my phone, the same one that had revealed the truth months earlier, and connected it to the projection system we had installed in the garden for a commemorative video of family photos. Emily looked at me with a curious smile, thinking I had prepared a romantic surprise for her. And it was romantic, just not in the way she expected. "Emily, these 15 years have been a lesson," I said, looking straight at her. "I've learned what trust really means. But more than that, I've learned what happens when someone thinks they can use my life as their personal playground." On the screen, instead of travel photos or anniversary memories, appeared screenshots of her conversations with the instructor, explicit messages, photos she had taken in our own bathroom, bank transfer receipts showing the money she had been sending her lover, my money. The silence that followed was so thick you could feel it on your skin. Emily went pale, her glass trembling in her hand. Her parents stared in horror. Her friends looked away, uncomfortable in the face of undeniable proof of her betrayal. She tried to speak, but only a choked sound came out. "Ethan, this isn't what it looks like," she stammered, using the most pathetic phrase every traitor relies on. "It's exactly what it looks like, Emily. And there's more," I replied, with a coldness that surprised even me. At that moment, Martin, my lawyer, entered through the side walkway, accompanied by a notary. They handed her a thick folder. Inside were the divorce papers, an immediate eviction order from the property held under one of my companies, a notice of the freezing of the accounts she had been draining. "You have 1 hour to pack whatever fits in a suitcase. The rest of your belongings will be sent to your instructor's address, though I doubt he has room in his small apartment, considering the business you tried to set up for him was just seized in a fraud investigation my auditors launched last week," I said, never raising my voice. She started crying, loud, desperate sobs that stirred not even a trace of pity in me. She dropped to her knees and tried to grab my hand, but I pulled away as if she were an insect. Her friends, the same ones who always cheered her girls' nights, vanished one by one. Her own parents watched her with a mixture of shame and disgust. That's when it hit her. She wasn't just losing her husband. She was losing her status, her security, and her dignity in front of everyone she had worked so hard to impress. I watched her climb the stairs, defeated, while the notary made sure she didn't take anything that didn't belong to her. There was a purely rational satisfaction in seeing her mask of perfection melt away. When she came back down with her suitcase, she was no longer the sophisticated woman hosting a glamorous dinner. She was a frightened stranger, with no idea where she would sleep that night. At the door, she looked back at me one last time, perhaps hoping to find a trace of doubt in my eyes. She found nothing, only ice. I closed the door and poured myself another drink. The silence in the house was the most beautiful music I had heard in years. Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's simply the sound of a lock turning, keeping out the one who never deserved to be inside. She thought I was the man who would stay and be humiliated. She forgot that an engineer knows exactly which wires to cut, to plunge an entire building into darkness. 6 months have passed since that night. The house is quiet, but it's no longer a silence filled with suspicion or lies. It's the silence of freedom. Many men ask me if I regret being so cold, if I regret not giving her a chance to explain herself. My answer is always the same. Explanations are for mistakes, not for calculated betrayals. Emily tried to call me for weeks from unknown numbers. She sent long emails, full of cheap justifications and promises of therapy. I didn't reply to a single one. Indifference is the deadliest blow you can deal to someone who lives off other people's attention. I heard through others that her great love story with the instructor didn't last even a month. Without my money flowing into his pockets, the romance lost its shine. The guy turned out to be exactly what I had suspected, an opportunist looking for an easy life. When she found herself living in a small rented studio and working a low-level job just to pay her bills, he simply went looking for another target. Betrayal builds nothing solid. It's a sandcastle washed away by the first tide of reality. I've reclaimed my time, my finances, and above all, my self-respect. I'm not looking for a new relationship. At 42, I've learned to enjoy my own company and the mental clarity that only comes when you take the trash out of your life. I've watched other men forgive, try to fix what was broken, only to end up betrayed again or trapped in a life of bitter resentment. I chose absolute cleanliness. There are no scars when the surgeon is precise. The lesson I take from this is that love should never be blind. Trust is a privilege earned daily, not a right granted by a marriage contract. If you feel that something is wrong, it's because something is wrong. Men often ignore their instincts out of fear of conflict or emotional laziness. I chose to face the conflict head-on and win it on my own terms. I'm not trying to be the hero of this story, just the man who refused to let himself become a victim. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's watching life collect its debts while you move forward, stronger, wiser, and completely untouchable. The fire she lit to burn down my home ended up illuminating my path toward a far better life without her. If this story felt as intense to you as it was for me to live it, leave your like and tell me in the comments what you would have done. And if you're not subscribed yet, turn on the bell so you don't miss the next stories.